Macron and Merz call for increased pressure on Russia. G7 issues strong joint statement on Russia, Middle East and security concerns. And US condemns the 17th of June Russian attack on Kyiv that claimed over 20 lives. The latest news next. The G7 countries need to ramp up pressure on Russia to secure an unconditional ceasefire in Ukraine, say German Chancellor Friedrich Merz and French President Emmanuel Macron.
I am returning to Germany cautiously optimistic that the US will decide to impose further sanctions against Russia. We must do everything we can to end the war against Ukraine as soon as possible. The ball is in Moscow's court.
Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron shared that he met with Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky on the sidelines of the summit.
We stand in solidarity with the Ukrainian people following Russia's massive strikes last night. We are firmly committed to stepping up pressure on Russia to agree to an immediate and unconditional ceasefire, one that Ukraine is ready for.
G7 summit in Canada. On June 16, the G7 summit kicked off in Alberta, Canada, bringing together leaders from the US, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, Europe and the UK. The agenda included discussions on the situation in the Middle East, the Russia-Ukraine war, and security in the Indo-Pacific region. It was expected that US President Donald Trump would meet with his Ukrainian counterpart on the sidelines of the summit to discuss a defense aid package. However, Trump left the G7 meeting early, stating beforehand that Russia's exclusion from the G8 was a mistake. He also explained to reporters why he has been hesitant to impose tougher sanctions on Russia, saying he is waiting for a possible deal to end the war in Ukraine. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney presented a joint statement from the G7 leaders following the summit in Kananaskis, where they discussed the war in Ukraine and ways to bring it to an end, according to the press service of the Canadian government. The event aimed to strengthen the economy, enhance security, accelerate digital transformation, and reinforce partnerships in response to global challenges. It also focused on achieving a just and lasting peace in Ukraine and committing to stability in the Middle East.
Leaders acknowledged the links between crisis theaters in Ukraine, the Middle East, and Indo-Pacific.
About war in Ukraine, the summit, the G7 leaders expressed support for US President Donald Trump's efforts to achieve a just and lasting peace in Ukraine.
They recognized that Ukraine has committed to an unconditional ceasefire, and they agreed that Russia must do the same. G7 leaders are resolute in exploring all options to maximize pressure on Russia, including financial sanctions.
The G7 leaders discussed support for a strong and sovereign Ukraine, including funding for defense as well as assistance for the country's recovery and reconstruction. About Middle East, at the summit, the G7 leaders reaffirmed their commitment to peace and stability in the Middle East. They exchanged views on developments following the Hamas terrorist attacks on Israel on October 7, 2023, and the active phase of the conflict between Israel and Iran. They also discussed the importance of unhindered humanitarian aid to Gaza, the release of all hostages, and a lasting ceasefire.
Leaders affirmed Israel's right to defend itself and were clear that Iran can never have a nuclear weapon.
Safe in the Pacific region, the G7 emphasized the importance of a free, open, prosperous and secure Indo-Pacific region. They discussed growing economic cooperation with the area and highlighted the need for constructive and stable relations with China. The G7 leaders urged China to refrain from destabilizing activities in the East China Sea and South China Sea and expressed concern about North Korea's nuclear weapons and ballistic missile programs. The US Embassy in Ukraine has called Russia's the 17th of June missile strike on Kyiv a senseless attack that contradicts President Donald Trump's recent call to end the war, reported by US Embassy in Ukraine in a statement. The embassy issued the statement on the 18th of June, the day Kyiv declared a day of mourning for those killed in the overnight Russian strike. By the morning of the 18th of June, the death toll had risen to 23 after emergency workers retrieved 7 more bodies from under the rubble of a 9-story residential building destroyed by a Russian missile. The US Embassy expressed condolences to the families of those killed by the Russian strike and stressed that this senseless attack directly opposes Trump's call to stop the killing and end the war.
Today, with all of Ukraine, we join a day of mourning in Kyiv for the victims of Russia's June 17th attack. 21 dead, including an American. More than 134 injured, including children. We extend deepest condolences to the victims' families.
The US State Department has condemned a large-scale Russian combined attack on Kyiv on the night of the 16th to the 17th of June, which killed over 20 people, reported by State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce. Bruce stated that the US administration had been informed about the strike.
We condemn those strikes and extend our deepest condolences to the victims and to the families of all those affected. The president, in the recent past, has made his thoughts clear about striking the civilian areas in that regard.
The State Department spokesperson also confirmed that a US citizen had been killed in the attack on Kyiv.
We can confirm the death of a US citizen in Ukraine, and we stand ready to provide all possible consular assistance. And out of respect to the family during this obviously horrible time, we have no further details to offer in that regard.
Condolences and condemnations matter, but they cannot replace action. Words must be followed by resolve. This brutal, deliberate targeting of civilians directly contradicts President Trump's recent call to stop the killing and end the war. If that call is sincere, it must now be matched by concrete steps to deter further aggression. We do not need more expressions of concern. We need steps, urgent, unified, decisive steps to hold Russia accountable, because every delay means another family shattered, another child buried under rubble. The world must choose passive sorrow or purposeful action. That's all for today. Thanks for watching this video. Support Ukraine, like and subscribe.